when I tell you something's easy, when I tell you something's achievable, when I tell you something's quick and practical, it is.
Hello and welcome to My Signature Dish. I'm Ollie Horn. This is the podcast where I speak to talented home cooks, find out their story and learn about their signature dish. I'm particularly excited about this episode as it's the first episode that I've recorded on location. Last week I visited the BBC Good Food Show at the Birmingham NEC, thanks to the very kind invitation of my friend Sammy, who's one of the food economists and stylists who works backstage there. It's a brilliant event and I got a chance to meet dozens of incredible independent producers, some of which you'll be hearing from on future episodes of this show. But this episode doesn't feature one of those exhibitors, but rather one of the presenters of the Good Food Show, Chris Bavin. If you live in the UK, you almost certainly know who Chris is. He's the presenter of Eat Well for Less, Britain's Best Home Cook, and a number of other food and science documentaries besides. I'm a big fan of Chris. I love his kind of no-nonsense style of TV presenting, and the shows that he's presented have done so much for food education in the UK in a really kind of matter-of-fact way. I managed to catch Chris between his presenting duties backstage at the show, and our conversation starts with Chris explaining to us how he got into the food industry in the first place. Enjoy.
I started importing flowers as a junior flower trader when I was 16, 17, bringing flowers in from all over the world and selling to the wholesale markets. In the UK, we've got, around the world actually, they've got wholesale markets, and these places supply the florists or the greengrocers or the street traders or the barra boys. So I was supplying them with, first of all, with flowers, and then I moved into fresh produce. I've been working with fresh produce now, fruits and vegetables, for over 20 years, and have fell in love with, the different varieties, the different seasons, the times of year when things are at their absolute best, and the simplicity of really great fruit, veg, herbs, whatever it might be. And then from that, I sort of fell in love with cooking. But the reason that I got into the media industry was we opened a fruit and veg shop in 2009 called the Naked Grocer. It was all about zero packaging, reducing our carbon footprint.
Which was completely ahead of its time, wasn't it? Only like this week now, a supermarket's trialling a plastic-free fruit and veg aisle.
And we were doing it 10 years ago. Yeah, we were probably a fraction too far ahead of a curve. You don't want to be too far ahead of a curve. Right. You can be just before it, but not maybe 8, 9, 10 years in front of it. But it did really well, and we had it for 7 or 8 years, and I loved it. I absolutely loved having the shop, meeting the public, having this wonderful array of beautiful seasonal fresh produce, and we went back to basics, with everything having to do exactly what it was supposed to do. The tomatoes tasted like tomatoes. We had everything that we sold did exactly what you would expect it to do, i.e. taste the way it should or the way you remember it tasting.
Did what it said on the tin, even though there were no tins.
Absolutely. Certainly no plastic packaging. But so then we had the shop for 7 or 8 years.
Just about the shop, I can definitely believe that one of the things that you enjoyed about that job was meeting people. Right? Yeah. Clearly you're a people person. What kind of questions would they be asking you when they were buying their fruit and veg?
Which is the best way to cook this, or what variety, or even coming in and saying, I've got people coming around, what should I cook?
Yeah.
The great thing about a greengrocer or a fishmonger or a butcher is they're experts in that area. So when you come in and ask me at a specific time of the year, what's good value? And value for me doesn't necessarily talk about money. That's part of it. But value as in, what am I going to get the most out of? So that's, in terms of flavor, in terms of nutrition, in terms of, volume, how do I make the most of my purchase and get the most for my money.
And also your skill set as well. Maybe a less ambitious cook, might not want to get a certain type of produce that needs a little bit more technique. Were there any kind of misconceptions that people had that you were fixing in the process of selling them fruit and veg?
The misconceptions in and around sort of fruit and veg is that maybe there isn't a huge difference in terms of flavour or in terms of varieties or in terms of countries of origin. So I think in terms of giving the public the understanding of where things came from. I mean, people don't necessarily differentiate between, easy peelers. Say, for example, within the family of easy peeler, you have clementines, you have clemenures, you have ori, you have nadacots, you have satsuma, you have tangerines. You have this whole but some people just look at them as small oranges.
You'd be great at that round on Pointless, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope so. Otherwise, I might look quite foolish. But that's the thing, So, and grapes, a grape can vary. We buy grapes now in green, red, or black, seedless or seeded. But there's a whole host of variables within that. You have different times of year, different countries of origin, different varieties. So just because you've eaten a grape this week that may have been early season Egyptian or whatever, doesn't mean, and you didn't particularly like it, doesn't mean to say that you don't like green grapes. You just didn't like very early season Egyptian grapes. But then when we move into Spanish or Chilean or Israeli or wherever Peruvian, there's so many different complexities within fruit and veg in terms of where it comes from and the variety, that actually it was good to sort of try and open people's eyes to that a little bit.
The first time I ever cooked with Japanese garlic, right, most of the garlic which I would have been using would have been either British or Chinese, which I think very similar. It completely changed how I used the ingredient, right? Because it cooks differently, it smells different. And I suppose one thing I realised is the offers that we get at the supermarket, right, is like they'll maybe give us 3 choices of potatoes, 2 choices of onion, if we're lucky. And that kind of creates a false illusion of really what's out there, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Well, it reduces your choice, doesn't it? And that's the thing, and I think that's why, I have always advocated that, the sort of going back to how we used to do it and go and buy your food from experts in that field. So when you go to your fishmonger or your butcher or your greengrocer, they can give you a better steer. If you're making mashed potato, they can recommend a certain variety of potato. If you're making chips, another one, or roast potatoes, another one that, entirely.
Hey, can I have a really quick masterclass on this? So my view is best potato for a roast potato, Yukon Gold.
Yeah?
Yeah? What's your tip?
Well, I mean, that is a good choice, but that's possibly not accessible for everybody all the time. So I think, if you go with a King Edward or a Maris Piper, basically you want quite a floury sort of potato.
What does floury mean?
Floury basically means higher dry. The technical terminology is high dry matter. So basically, there's not a huge amount of moisture within that potato. Fluffy. Yeah. Okay. So when you want that sort of, you want a crisp sort of outside, and you want that really fluffy center. You want a floury, high dry matter within your potato, basically. So with something like, we don't really eat boiled potatoes a lot now. We'd use new potatoes to do that job, but before we would have had boiled potatoes or salad potatoes. You want a waxier potato.
And what does waxy mean?
Waxy means that there's a bit more moisture in there, so it's not going to fall apart. Basically, you're cooking it in a different way. You're boiling it to a much, a higher point. So
and it still maintains its structure.
It maintains its structure, and you've got that sort of creaminess to it.
So is that the scale then? When you're thinking about potatoes, is it kind of waxy on one end of the scale and then
dry
on the other end of the scale?
Absolutely, yeah. Right. And then lots in the middle bit, yeah.
Right. And so when a lot of chefs talk about you need a very starchy potato or a not very starchy potato, what does that mean?
So starchy, I think we're looking at starchy. Well, all potatoes are quite starchy, but I think starchy, when they're talking about that, they're talking about the other end, the fluffier end, so the higher, drier matter. Yeah. So ideal for roasting, ideal for chipping, ideal for frying in one way or another. And roasting is ultimately, frying to some extent or another. So, I think that's what they're talking about when they say that.
I have a feeling I could pick any vegetable and go this deep and we'd have, 6 hours of content. But I really feel I should move on because your story doesn't end with you having this impressive pioneering shop.
No.
And certainly I think the first time I would have been familiar with your work was Eat Well for Less, which I think was a brilliant program. There's lots of learnings that you can get from that show, right? Can you share, for someone that hasn't watched it, what the kind of the takeaway, bullet pointed, this is the message of the show?
So Eat Well for Less, basically, we go to people's we start working with a family that have approached us. We look at what they're spending on food, look at the foods that they're buying, look at the meals that they're cooking, looking at their shopping habits, and then we try and improve it. Basically, we want, ultimately the main headline is reduce their overall spend without compromising on their enjoyment of food. Which you can do, absolutely 100%. But then along the way that we try and increase their veg consumption, we try and make their diet slightly healthier, we try and lessen their reliance on convenience foods or takeaway foods or processed foods. So, we sort of try and take a 360 view of basically all the food that they're buying and eating and cooking, and see if we can improve it or see what we can do to improve it in various different ways. And then we save them a lot of money in some cases, but we certainly improve their diet and their enjoyment of food, actually. I think so many people now there's a pressure, a stress. So many parents, day in, day out are faced with the dilemma of, oh, I've got to cook dinner again. What am I going to do? How do I feed my family? It becomes a chore, and cooking for me should never be a chore. Yeah. So we want to try and put the love and the fun back into it.
And you also kind of share techniques as well, don't you, about how to make just being in the kitchen less daunting?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, cooking is taking a series of ingredients or products, putting them together, and then exposing them to heat for a variable amount of time. I mean, it's not complicated.
Doesn't sound very difficult when you say it like that, does it?
Well, it's not, is it? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, there are lots of complicated elements. Of course there are. You know, same as anything. You know, and especially when you start to go into, you know, Michelin star quality food or fine dining. You know, there are. You know, when you start to make gels or sous vide or, you know, beads or whatever it might be, you know, there's a million and one really complicated foams and all of that you can do. But listen, good home cooking, tasty home, nutritious, healthy cooking isn't hard. It isn't complicated. It isn't, you know. But having said that, listen, if you're struggling with it, then that's absolutely fine. If you've never been shown to do something, then you can't be expected to do it.
Well, a lot of people that are listening to this not because they're intimidated by their kitchen, because they're intimidated on how to make that transition from being a good home cook to being someone that can potentially showcase their skills on a wider stage, to become entrepreneurial, sell their wares. So I have two questions in this regard. The first is, can you give me some examples of the transformations that you saw of people that were rubbish in the kitchen and then all of a sudden, based on your interventions, managed to create something incredible? And then the second part of that question is, can you think of an example from some of the other shows that you presented where people have taken their great cooking skills and then really taken them to the next level? And what are the things that bridge those gaps in the kitchen?
Well, first of all, in the first instance, it's belief and confidence, and I think that's what we do with Eat Well for Less. I think we hold their hand in the interim, and we give them that belief and we give them that confidence. You know, we're physically there with them, and we say, right, you know, you're struggling, you know, with kitchen confidence, which, you know, you're not alone. I'm going to stand next to you, and we're going to cook this together. I don't really do any of the cooking. You know, it's about getting them to do it.
Do you think the fact that you're not a trained chef helps?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I brought a cookbook out this year, and first of all, I struggled with, do I have a credibility to write a cookbook? I've never worked in a commercial kitchen. I've never had any formal training, you know. But actually, the more I think about it, the more I think that makes more sense, because neither of the people that I want to replicate my recipes. So, you know, when I tell you something's easy, when I tell you something's achievable, when I tell you something's quick and practical, it is. Yeah. When a Michelin star chef tells you something's easy, it might be easy for them, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy for you. You know, in the same way that, you know, Dele Alli thinks pulling a ball out of the air, you know, from 30-yard pass, you know, and controlling it in one touch is easy. Yeah. It's not easy for the rest of us.
And you just don't need to create Michelin star standard food at home, do you?
No, you don't.
It's supposed to be special.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And you're supposed to go and pay a reasonable amount of money for it and enjoy it and have it as a treat. But cooking at home, you know, is you're doing it, you know, potentially 2-3 times every single day. You want it to do, you know, you want it to impress, you want it to taste good. I think it should look good as well, but I don't want to be sort of messing around with it. But I don't think that should be difficult. So in terms of some of the transformations, I mean, we've gone to some families and they've gone from not being able to cook at all, you know, relying on ready meals, relying on takeaways, to cooking restaurant standard food, you know, good, smart, tasty food, you know, and turning it out confidently and in very little time. And then when you go to something like Britain's Best Home Cook, you know, we see some very good cooks, and then you see their journey and you see them just build on that and build on that and build on that, and then suddenly they're turning out absolutely incredible plates of food.
I'm fascinated to hear your thoughts on this, because a lot of the biggest kind of success stories, certainly in the past 10 years, if you think about, you know, food trucks that have gone on to become pop-ups, that have gone on to become restaurants, we've even got national chains now that are a result of someone that's been tinkering in their kitchen. So it really is possible, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
What do you think sets this kind of ambitious home cook apart from someone that's only ever going to be good at impressing at a dinner party?
Well, I suppose it's the desire to do it. I mean,
well, of course, right.
If that's what you want, then there's nothing to stop you doing that. It won't be easy by any stretch of the imagination. Listen, you know, you can do anything. I think, you know, we're in a time now where you're reasonably limitless in what you can achieve. The only thing that will prevent that, or one of the only things that will prevent that is you telling yourself you can't do it, or not without sounding too blunt, not being prepared to put the hard work in. When I opened my greengrocers, I was working in excess of 80, 90 hours a week, every single week, 6.5, 7 days a week.
And so that was time that you were sourcing the food and also being in the shop?
Up at 3 o'clock in the morning, into the wholesale market, not finishing until sort of 6, 7 o'clock at night. Then you've got orders to do, then you've got your books to do, then you've got your staffing issues and various other things. So, you can do anything if you're prepared to work hard enough, and and make some sacrifices as well. I do a lot of talks to sort of younger people and sort of with a sort of with a view to try and inspire them a little bit. And I always say, listen, you can achieve anything. I think you don't choose to be the best. You can't choose to be the best. You can't choose to be the smartest or the fastest or the best at this or the best at that. That's not necessarily always a choice. But what you can always choose to do is be the one that works the hardest. And if you do that for long enough, you will be successful in whatever you do.
I do think that's true. I don't think enough people believe that, but I do think that's true.
It is 100% true.
Yeah. Or at least what's certainly true is if you look at all the people that are successful, one of the things that definitely marks them out is the fact that they've all been working hard, right?
Yeah.
That's no accident.
No.
So let's talk. I mean, obviously the contestants on Britain's Best Home Cook are incredibly hardworking. I think that's safe to say. What are the things which you've learned from them?
Oh, good question. I mean, some of their inspirations are far and wide. I mean, you've got people with various different heritages, and that's nice. You start to see lots of different cultures and styles of cuisine, which is nice because I grew up in a traditional English household. I mean, spaghetti bolognese was probably
as exotic as it got.
That's that was exotic. Listen, don't you laugh. I mean, I grew up in the 80s. Salad was iceberg lettuce, cucumber, and chopped tomato. And yeah, listen,
and salad cream.
Of course, of course. Like dressing, I mean, salads have probably changed unrecognisably from when I was a kid, but so has all food, really. And my mum had 3 children. She had 2 jobs. And my dad worked. My mum was incredibly busy, and I think cooking was a chore for her. I think it was. Which is a shame, but that's how it was.
So obviously that your parents won't have been exposed to the kind of dishes which you've been exposed to in your professional life. Can you think of some dishes which are your parents still with us?
Yes.
Is there anything which now they're enjoying which you couldn't ever imagine they would have enjoyed when you were younger? Yeah,
probably quite a lot. I mean, I think we always had. Curry was still quite popular. I think curry was sort of big in the 60s and 70s, and my parents would have had a familiarity with that.
But it would have been a very specific kind of curry, wouldn't it? It would have been that there was, from what I understand about the history of curry in the UK, it was there wasn't actually a lot of the people that came to the UK as immigrants and set up curry houses were all from a very similar region.
Yeah.
Sometimes not even from India, but from Bangladesh. Mm-hmm. And well, maybe you know more about this history than I do. But basically, they were creating curries for the British palate. Yeah. Right. And as spicy as the British people could cope with. And also, don't forget the cost of importing some of these ingredients would have been really expensive at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, wow. I mean, that's changed dramatically. I mean, with people travelling. And people coming to live here from different countries, and they've brought their ingredients with them, or their desire to have those ingredients that make, that are familiar from home. So, if you go to any greengrocers now, or even in the supermarkets, the range of what we would have called exotic, produce.
It's now commonplace.
Is now mainstream, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you look at sweet potatoes or butternut squash or, avocados, these things were, kale. Kale was valueless. Kale, you wouldn't have been able to give, you couldn't have paid someone to eat kale 15, 20 years ago. Now, we can't get enough of it, but it's all changing. But my parents now, they like Thai food, Vietnamese food. I mean, I wouldn't say they're like adventurous with food, but certainly their palates have broadened. And they cook from my recipe book as well. So so they'll replicate it. But my dad's sort of getting more into cooking as he gets older. I think he's got a bit more time. Listen. But we had a traditional. we had 7, 8, 9, 10 meals on rotation.
And what were those staples?
So you would have shepherd's pie. I mean, mince was featured heavily in my. You'd have had your shepherd's pie, or your cottage pie, you'd have had your spaghetti bolognese, you'd have had maybe a gammon, you'd have had your roast dinner on a Sunday always, then something left over with that on the Monday. We may have had some form of curry, maybe like a chicken casserole sort of thing. But yeah, so you're reasonably sort of standard fare, fish and chips, steak,
Did
pie.
you ever help in the kitchen?
Yeah, I've always loved cooking, actually, ever since I can remember, really. I've always loved sort of trying to add different things, what happens if I put that in? And I wonder, I've always been quite sort of not adventurous necessarily, but curious and experimental, as to what goes with what and why does that work and why doesn't that work, and that's disgusting, and why was that so how did I make that so bad?
Were your family happy to try your creations?
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what I've done now with my boys? I've got 2 young boys, 6 and 2. They love making potions and messes and getting their hands dirty and all of these sorts of things. And I thought, why are we just making a sort of, ultimately like a Play-Doh concoction or just flour and water or, whatever it might be? Why are we not now just making, an omelette or, a bread mixture, a dough or a cake mixture or whatever it might be? So then they get the best of both worlds. They get to crack their eggs, they get to put the flour in the water and the butter and mix it all up. But then you put it in the oven or you put it in a pan and then they can make something and then they can eat what they've made. And they love it. We spend when I'm home. I mean, we travel a lot for work, but when I'm home, we all cook in the kitchen together, the 3 of us, and it's nice.
Are there any ingredients which you're particularly excited about at the moment that, when you were back in your greengrocer days, if you thought, if only I was selling that would be flying off the shelves now in my capable hands?
I don't think it's changed. I don't think there's anything that's sort of come out in the last sort of 3 or 4 years really that I sort of think, oh wow, I wish I'd had that. I sort of wish everybody had cottoned on to the unnecessary use of single plastic a little bit earlier. I think if we'd have started making headway into that. There's been some developments in the dispenser units and stuff for helping reduce packaging. They weren't really commonplace when I had my shop, so I can sort of see how I would fit it out now.
Yeah.
With the dispensers that you sort of people bring their ice cream tubs and these sorts of things in and fill them up or whatever.
These are extremely common now in some parts of the west coast of America. There are many supermarkets, particularly in San Francisco, where people are just coming in with big bagfuls of different containers.
Great.
And the thing is, it's often cheaper, right? So getting olive oil and putting it in your own bottle, they're selling it at a cheaper price.
Well, that's interesting, because absolutely in principle, if you're not paying for the packaging, it should be cheaper. Packaging has a cost.
Well, it's not. Yeah, and it's not just the cost of that packaging, is it? It's the fact you've got to transport it, right? And every time you have a bottle, there's going to be air that you're having to pay to ship.
Of course.
Do you think that the prevalence of the recycling movement in the past 10, 15 years has accentuated the problem? That if only we didn't think the recycling was such a good thing, that we wouldn't have felt we would have felt less guilty about using all this plastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's still a lot of confusion about what can be recycled, what can't be recycled. Then there's a real discrepancy within local authority to actually what they recycle. And we've seen time and time again that actually even what we consider to be recycled is just being taken to the Far East and dumped somewhere, which is absolutely disgraceful. It should be criminal, really. I mean, how that's happening, I think is beyond me, and it's a sort of out of sight, out of mind. But the great work that Hugh has done, and obviously David Attenborough, has really brought it to the fore. I mean, bottled water, coffee, takeaway coffee cups. These are small things. These are one thing at a time. The carrier bags. 2
or 3 years ago, there's no way I would have been carrying around a bottle like this, is there?
Everyone's got. Well, not everyone. That's not fair. But I mean, lots of people have got, which is great. And the that's the thing. Get yourself a reusable water bottle. Get yourself a reusable coffee cup. Get yourself a few nice jute bags or bags for life. And then suddenly, just those 3 things will make a big difference. And then go and then find the next thing and then the next thing and just keep going from there.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a big radical lifestyle change all at once, does it? No. So if only we'd listened to you 10 years ago, then supermarkets would have all been plastic free. What are your predictions for what a supermarket, if everyone does the right thing, what's a supermarket going to look like in 10, 15 years' time? Well,
there's a lot of issues at the moment that I think need addressing, and a lot of them revolve around food. I think our health is a real issue. You've got 62% of the UK population is now overweight. 25% of us are now obese. 3.8 million of us have type 2 diabetes, which is rising year on year. And we have a lot of food poverty as well, and a lot of food waste. So we've got these issues.
It doesn't really make sense, does it?
And then you've got the environmental impact of all of these things as well. So yeah, I mean, how have you got between 2 and 10 million tons of food going in the bin, depending on how you quantify it, and at what stage in the process. But between 2 and 10 million tons of food are being wasted every year, and we've got 8 million people in some form of food poverty and 4 million people using food banks. So I think we're going to see the social conscience of our businesses grow. Yeah. I think we have an expectation that is now profit. You chasing profit is not enough anymore. And I don't think we're going to continue to accept that. And I think there's going to be a huge wholesale change, a real sea change in that. And I think, it's not enough that, these huge corporations just say, well, listen, it's all, it's about customer satisfaction and share price. Mm. I think there's going to be a third thing. I think it's going to be are you doing the right thing? Yeah. Are you making the right decisions based on the well of the planet or the well of the people, or and I think that's going to change, and I think you'll see, of course, the packaging will be reduced, it will be phased out. I think we're going to see wholesale reformulation of some of our foods. We've seen the sugar drinks, the sugar tax on the drinks, which was mandatory. They've made they've requested a voluntary reduction of sugar and calories in lots of foods. By 2020, so by next year, they want a 20% reduction in calories and sugar and salt. So I think maybe we'll start seeing some products not available.
Yeah.
I think we'll see some huge price changes. I think we're going to see some big price increases. I think food inflation is inevitable. I think Brexit has made it a bit more immediate, but this has been coming. If you think about every single facet or factor in growing produce, in producing food, whether it's being grown or manufactured or made or whatever,
even importing it.
Even important, it doesn't matter. They're going up. Land is becoming more scarce and more expensive. Water is becoming more scarce and therefore will become more expensive. Fuel, labour, all of these things.
I think this policy debate is extremely important because I'm overweight, and I don't think that me being overweight is down to choices of other people. Right? I think I have a personal responsibility because ultimately it's me that's been putting the food in my mouth. Mm-hmm. However, the more I've considered it, the more I've thought, well, actually, I've been making choices about the food that I've eaten based on a certain choice architecture that's been made on my behalf, right? So the supermarkets that I've gone into, the products that have been available have been chosen by someone else. When I go to a restaurant, what goes into the dish is broadly chosen by someone else. The media that I enjoy, et cetera, et cetera. So at some point, maybe there's an argument to say, well, if we as individuals can't take responsibility for our own health, which we demonstrably can't, right? Maybe there is an argument that government or even private enterprise does do. I think it's called nudge theory, isn't it? Does change the way in which we eat. Which side of this debate are you on?
So I'm of the school of thought that you are not completely. No, I'm not talking about you specifically now. I'm talking generally. Yeah,
you're very welcome to.
No, you're not. You're neither completely blameless nor completely to blame. And I think when you start to look at the extraordinary facts of 62%, when it's the majority, it can't be the individual, can it? It can't be the majority of people are doing something wrong. If the majority of people are doing something wrong, it's almost right. Does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, there's an expression,
or at least it's the normal.
Absolutely.
It's not abnormal behaviour.
No, absolutely. So I think there's an Italian expression which is tutti colpevoli, nessuno colpevole, which basically translates as if everyone is guilty, then nobody is guilty. And that, I think, really applies to this. If 1 in 4 of us are obese and 62% of us are overweight, then there is something drastically wrong, and it is not lack of willpower or lack of movement or lack of knowledge. It can't be. It can't be. You're telling me that the majority of the population used to know what they were doing and used to be able to exert a bit of self-control. Now suddenly someone's flicked a switch and stopped that happening. Impossible.
What do you think about the prevalence of food delivery businesses, which we couldn't even have expected 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really get involved in it, but it's very convenient, isn't it? On the one hand, but But there's obviously issue. I mean, this is the thing. You've got everything at your fingertips, haven't you? At the touch of a button, you can have whatever you want delivered to you wherever you are.
You're not feeding your boys with Uber Eats?
I've never used it. I don't have it on my phone.
There we go.
I've never used any of those takeaway delivery. Listen, don't get me wrong. We'll have a takeaway every now and again. Like
Fish and chips.
We fish and chips and a curry. We've got a great curry house down the road from us, and and it's not, it's for me that's a treat, But I think that's part of the problem. I think it's gone from being a treat to being a nigh on daily occurrence. I mean, I can count. So when I was growing up, I vividly remember the first time I had Kentucky Fried Chicken. It was Christmas time. We'd been to a pantomime, driving home quite late. Everyone was hungry. My mum's like, I don't want to cook when we get. And we were in Feltham, and it was brand new, like brand spanking, and it was like, what is this? I mean, it was like, my word. But that food landscape has changed unrecognizably.
I'd love to try fried chicken for the first time again. How good must that be?
Oh, mate, I must have been 8 or 9, maybe. Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't have had. I mean, you talk about fast food restaurants. We had McDonald's. That was it. That was nigh on it. Or you might have had a Wimpy or a Star Burger or something. This was, we used to go out for the big family celebration dinners annually to the Harvester. I mean, that was like, and everyone was dressed up, and that was a proper thing. And I could, everyone would have prawn cocktails, steak and chips, and Black Forest Gatto. It was, but that was annual. Yeah. Not even every year. My boys can, my boys would have eaten out. The 6 and 2, they would have eaten out probably more in their 6 and 2 years than I probably did in the first 15, 18 years.
And what are the staples in your home now?
In terms of meals?
Yeah, in terms of what you're cooking. It's not the same 10 dishes that your parents had on rotation,
No, it's not. No, but do you know what? But there is a lot of repetition, but then you tweak it a little bit. That's the thing. I think that's what you do. And you tweak it to keep it a bit more interesting and varied, but you also tweak it depending on what you've got, what needs using up. I'm a big fan of using up leftovers. I hate food waste, as we touched upon earlier. Fish pie is a big favourite in our house. I love a pie. Steak and ale pie is great. Basically anything with, as you'll probably get the thing, anything with mashed potatoes is all right by me.
Just before we move on, I'm completely fascinated by the food waste problem. This is actually one of the reasons why I started working on this project Pona in the first place. And what I find uniquely fascinating about the food waste problem is it transcends basically any metric. So it doesn't matter whether you're a rich country or a poor country. It doesn't matter whether you're a country of abundance or a country of scarcity. And it doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter where you fit in the socioeconomic spectrum. There is always food waste at basically every single part of the value chain in every single country. And you compare our country to a country like Nigeria, which has 70% food waste. That's caused for a different reason than say food waste in the UK. That might be to do with poorer infrastructure, right? So eggs on a road, they break, or poorer refrigeration in some rural parts, in restaurants. And I think that it is absolutely unconscionable to buy something in a supermarket that's already gone through that entire value chain, and there's already been loads of loss, right? So if you're buying one cabbage, presumably, you've got to assume that maybe 1 in 3 of those cabbages was rotten and couldn't have been picked, or then it was transported, then one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that one cabbage that's on your dining room table, I'm not sure why you put it there, but for the sake of me making my point, I put it on a table. That one cabbage, that kind of represents more food production than that one cabbage, doesn't it?
Of course it does, yeah.
And
the energy and effort.
Well, exactly, and the refrigeration and the cost. But knowing all this and truly believing that there are, I'm one of these people that, I don't believe that we as individuals, just by doing our bit, are going to save the planet. Right? I do think that there needs to be a big global movement, and I think it's just changing our personal behaviour won't be enough, but that's still important. But even knowing all this, I still find myself throwing away food that I bought because I haven't been able to use it in time, or because I'm not sure if it might be bad. I'd love to just take a quick tangent here and pick your brains on, for people that are like me, that they are persuaded this is a massive problem and they feel ashamed. What are the simple strategies they can do to make sure that none of this food ends up in the bin?
So my answer to that starts with the answer I answer a lot of questions with, and it could be a question of, how do I save money? How do I take the pressure out of cooking? How do I waste less food? And that's plan. Because the only reason you're throwing food away is because you've bought stuff without knowing when you're going to eat it, what you're going to eat with it, and when you're going to eat it.
Eyes bigger than your belly in the supermarket.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I'm going to buy some flat parsley and some basil and some, pesto and the yogurt and the chilies and the garlic and the, whatever it might be. But without knowing that Monday I'm having this meal, therefore I need X, Y, and Z. Tuesday I'm having this, so I have X, Y, and Z. So if you go into a supermarket armed with let's start at the very beginning. Okay, so the week before, Sunday, for example, you sit down and you work out what meals you're going to be having Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then you make a list of all the things that you're going to need to make those. Then you take it into your kitchen, cross-reference it, and cross off everything you've got. Therefore, you've got your net list. That's what you need. And you go and buy that. If you go and buy that and then stick to your meal plan, there is no real reason why any of that would go in the bin. Then also adapt it, change it, utilize the leftovers, freeze, freezing food. There is no excuse. There is, I understand, space is smaller. Yeah, people only have like a small... tiny. Some people have that little ice, thing in the top of their freezer. I get it. That, we don't all go home to a big chest freezer. I understand that. But freezing, making stock, making sauces, making soups.
There's a misconception about freezing too, though, isn't there? Because I think we associate freezing with like bad ready meals, right? They're frozen and they're bad. Therefore, if I freeze, if I freeze meat, then it's going to go bad.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's ever true, is it? Are there examples of food that that you really do noticeably reduce their quality as a result of freezing them?
Yeah, absolutely. But then it depends what you're going to do with it afterwards. Yeah, listen, the internal integrity of some, or the internal structural integrity of some things will be compromised. If you froze a cucumber, it'd be disgusting. But then if you're freezing spinach or something that will sort of start to break down, like a banana's probably a perfect example, actually, that you freeze it. It's not going to be it won't come out when you defrost it. It won't ever be what it was, but it won't
be rejuvenated like a
no. But
like
it's
still cream.
But it's still perfect.
Yeah,
still perfect for a banana bread or a smoothie. Better even, arguably, for a smoothie. Or whatever you might be doing. So most lettuce and anything with a really high water content, you're going to struggle to freeze, and then you can freeze it. Of course you can. The problem comes when you defrost it. Right.
You can freeze it and throw away.
Yeah. It sort of defeats the object, doesn't it? But most things, you can freeze. I freeze eggs. Split them. Separate. How often do you need egg yolks or just couple of egg whites? And you always need them at a time when you haven't got any eggs. But yet you might have thrown eggs away the week prior, and then you need them the next whatever. So, listen, try and freeze as much as you can, but then don't freeze it like some sort of archaeological experiment. I mean, freeze it and then use it in the next sort of, it's not...
And how do you tell? I think this is great advice, and I wish I had the discipline to follow it to the letter to really plan. But I love being experimental, right? I love going to particularly an exotic supermarket or a supermarket from a different country and going, well, I haven't got a clue what this is. Kimchi paste, yeah, why not? What do you think I should do in order to adopt your advice, but also still maintain the same sense of spontaneity and fun in the kitchen?
So there's no reason why they're not exclusive things for me. What I sometimes recommend to people is leave yourself a freestyle day. But then if you like to be creative and you want to challenge yourself by opening that veg drawer or your cupboard and seeing what you've got. Yeah. Use the internet if you want, if you need a bit of guidance. And say, punch in, 3 or 4 or 5 of the ingredients that you've got that need using up, and then be experimental and bold and brave and creative with those. That's the way to challenge yourself. I'm going to challenge myself not to throw anything away and try a new dish. And maybe you go and get a bit of kimchi paste or whatever, harissa or whatever, whatever it might be, to bring those things together. But the main crux of the issue is you're not throwing anything away. You're actually using that and utilizing everything that you've got. And it's money as well, isn't it? It's money through the food chain and it's money out of your pocket as well.
Is your signature dish something wild and experimental?
No, far from it.
What's the thing that you'll go to as kind of something that you can execute to absolute perfection?
Well, I think anyone can execute this to absolute perfection, but for me, one of my favourite all-time comfort, cuddle on a plate, like you're a bit, you might be a bit under the weather or you've had a really hard week at work or, whatever it might be, and I come home and put sausage and mash with some onion gravy and a bit of buttered cabbage and maybe some peas, that, you know, a little bit of mustard, that for me is just, I'm getting excited thinking about it. That's what I want for my dinner.
I associate bangers and mash as kind of a dish from the part of the world where you're from.
Yeah, and it was. I think it was my favourite growing up as a kid, and it still remains my favourite now. I mean, I've eaten in loads of Michelin star restaurants. I know lots of Michelin star chefs. I eat fabulous, exotic, well executed, fine dining food. But if you put that in front of me, like, you've got a friend for life, because that's bang on.
So what's special about your bangers and mash?
Nothing really. I mean, I do make an exceptional mashed potato.
Do you do the French method of just using it as a conduit for butter?
Yeah, pretty much. Salt and butter.
Yeah, half.
Pepper, salt and
Exactly.
butter, loads of it, yeah. Warm the milk up, warm the butter up, warm the milk up. Use a good potato. Again, like, Maris Piper is a good all-rounder.
So why is a Maris Piper good for mashed potato?
Because of the dry matter in there. So you can make it really creamy.
So that means that it's a
fluffy
potato.
Fluffier, lighter. And do you know what? Again, life lessons and something that's true. Do you know what makes a good mashed potato? Effort. Put a bit of hard work in. Put a bit of elbow grease. You've got to work it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you can use the sort of rice
machines
or whatever. Yeah, I don't do that. But listen, you just get to work with it.
Yeah.
But you are right. There might. Some of my dietitian friends might not be too pleased with the amount of salt and butter, but it is what it is.
The way that I found making mashed potato really nice, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is I heat cream up and infuse it with anything that I've got. So there's like rosemary or garlic. And so, I don't use half butter, which I think is very good. I'll use a quarter butter and then a quarter cream.
Which is better.
Is it better?
Yeah, cream is less fat than butter.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right then. I should add more.
So single cream has something like, I think it's 23% fat, and butter is like 80 or 90%.
Yeah.
So
whichever way you look at it, it's still not ideal, is it?
For sure.
Okay, so you got really simple.
It's not a salad.
Yeah, right.
Is it? But listen, I eat salads. I love a salad. And I love veg, and I eat a lot of veg. But bangers and mash for me, when I have it, I want it to be
So
nice.
you've got really simple creamy mash. What kind of sausages are you using?
For me, plain pork from the butcher, really good quality, like really, really good quality.
What kind of meat percentage are we talking?
Do you know what? I don't know, actually. I've never checked, but I mean, like, decent. I mean, he makes them himself. He minces the pork and he makes them on site, and he's a great butcher down in the local farm shop to me. Really, really good. I'd imagine it's probably like a 70-80% sort of vibe, isn't it?
One of the things that I've personally been struggling with is I accept the moral case for not eating meat from an environmental point of view and probably from a health point of view. And I thought your documentary about meat was absolutely excellent. It was called The Truth About Meat, where you basically you took a deep dive into all of the things that that are known to be problematic about meat.
As deep a dive as you can in an hour. I mean, it's a big subject. Listen, there's lots. I mean, this whole sort of meat free or plant-based diet is growing. There's no two ways about it. I mean, I think there's 3.8 million vegetarians in the UK now, and I think there's like 1.25 million vegans and a lot more flexitarians. I eat meat. My wife's vegetarian. My boys eat meat, but we will go 2-3 days without eating meat sometimes. And I don't think you need meat in your diet all the time, not every day. But what I'm a big advocate of, when you do eat meat, spend as much money as you can on it. Yep. Which sort of goes contrary to the advice that I normally give.
Yeah.
But actually, save money where you can. But for me, when you and listen, if you can't afford to buy chicken that has had a lot more consideration to the welfare given. I'm not judging anyone that is struggling to feed their family. Like, I will not.
Yeah, of course.
I will not. But as much as you can spend on your meat, that will ensure better welfare for the animal, which is important. It's respectful, and it will also ensure better quality. And I think that's what you want from meat. I think we should eat less of it, and when we eat it, eat better quality.
So even after researching and presenting this program for an hour, where you looked at basically the worst that the meat industry could have possibly presented to you, I imagine. And I'm saying this as someone that does eat meat, how with a good conscience can you eat sausages? So
it was interesting. I think when I went to the abattoir, it was quite a moving day. I think it took its, it sort of shocked me a bit. Obviously I've always made the connection between, meat and animals, although not everybody makes that connection. Yeah. I think sometimes we conveniently brush over it, but
we have different words for it, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. I know.
We eat beef and we look at cows in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. But seeing a half-ton cow come in and get shot in the head and sort of collapse in front of you and then get, hung up and quartered and have their head cut off and all of this sort of stuff. And I was in a respectful, good, artisan, small abattoir. If you went to one of the larger factories,
they were the ones which were happy to go on film, I imagine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, but do you know what? The thing I took from it the most was, if you eat meat, and listen, I think you're entitled to. It's not for me to say otherwise. But I think you have a responsibility to eat, or certainly be prepared to eat, all of the animal. For someone to say that they're happy for a half-ton cow to be killed, so they can have a 200-gram filet mignon, or I only eat this cut, or I only have that bit. That's not cool. Like, we have to, nose to tail. If you're not prepared to eat tongue and liver and the offal and all of these things, then maybe there's something not quite right with your sort of connection with it, really, because I don't think that's fair. That's not fair on the animal. I don't think that's fair on anything, really. So, and we do. I love liver. Liver, bacon, and onions is fabulous. But yeah, listen, my wife's vegetarian. I don't eat meat an awful lot, and I certainly ate less after making that program.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, after going to the abattoir. Yeah, I don't think I ate meat for a fortnight.
But nevertheless, bangers and mash is delicious.
Still favourite. Yeah, it's still my favourite.
So we've got these incredible sausages, pork sausages, on a bed of creamy mash.
No flavouring. No flavouring the sausages. So
it's not like a Cumberland or
no, God, crying out loud, no. I'm just pure.
You're a purist.
Yeah,
okay.
I am, yeah.
And how do you cook the sausages? In a pan?
Just in the oven.
Oh, you oven cook sausages?
Yeah, bake them, yeah. Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
Do you get a nice skin still if you do that?
You do, yeah. You can do, absolutely. And I mean, when you buy a good sausage, you don't get that sort of expenditure of liquid, as much, but you still get a bit. But for me, frying them in, I've never really got on with frying them in the pan too much.
I think if you do, you have to do it on a really low temperature to get good results.
Yeah, you do, and you got to keep moving them around, and they're not
round.
Yes, that's right. So I stick them in. I'm perfectly happy with sticking them in the oven, but I cook them. I cook them reasonably well. I don't like a particularly pink sausage.
Sure.
I'll probably go.
Well, it's not really the right cut of meat to eat rare, is it?
No, it's not. Although pink pork is back on the menu, isn't it?
Yeah, but at least by eating the sausage, we are true to your mantra of making sure that every part of the animal. And just to round this off, then, I don't think bangers and mash is complete without a good gravy.
Yeah.
What's the secret to your onion gravy?
Well, I mean, a bit of stock. Start with some stock. Get some, first of all, the onions low.
Refer to episode 1 to find out how to make a perfect chicken stock.
There you go. Get loads of onions, really caramelize them, get them like cooking for a long time.
And how are you doing that? Just salt in a pan and leave it?
Yeah, get the salt obviously takes some of the moisture out, and then just time. Just keep them on a pan for a long time. Sometimes, depending on how fancy I'm feeling, you might puree them. And then basically I like to make a big batch of gravy and then stick it in the freezer, and you can bring some out and then just do a bit by bit, because making a really good gravy can take some time. Sometimes I go a bit more chefy with it, like it's almost on the edge of being a jus, if you will. With some red wine, and then you might need to thicken it with a bit of corn flour, which I know the purists are anti. But
bit of butter as well. Why not? In for a penny.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, I have been known. Yes.
Great. And this dish, do you think this is going to be kind of your family legacy when your children grow up and they're interviewed on this podcast when I'm an old man? Are they going to say, my dad, he was a very basic man. He had this one boring dish on rotation.
Yeah, maybe.
What do you think? What do you think is going to be the staple of your children's generation?
Interesting. I think, it could well be plant-based, couldn't it? Could be insects. Could be vacuum-packed space food. I mean, who knows where we're going with it.
What do you hope? Because you're in a unique position that you can change the public's view on these kind of issues.
Yeah, I mean, do we ever go back? But then we also, over history, things are cyclical, aren't they? I'd like to go back to seasonal, a little bit more self-sufficient. I think, we don't need strawberries in December. I don't think we need salad all year round. I think, I think to go back to a slightly more seasonal diet, which is a bit more responsible, not necessarily draining the world resources as much as, shipping stuff all the way around the world. Listen, but by the same token, we can't grow some things. We can't grow bananas. I still think we want to eat bananas. We want to eat easy peelers. We want to eat pineapples. That's fine. But as much as we can, when possible. So, like when apples are in season in the UK, they sit alongside apples from New Zealand. Completely unnecessary. So I think, there are times where actually we can take a slightly more simplistic view and use our own produce first. I think that would make a big difference. And I think we will go more plant-based. And as a greengrocer or former greengrocer, a bit more of a plant-based diet is probably not necessarily a bad thing.
That was Chris. I could have spoken to Chris for hours if only his schedule would have allowed. Unfortunately, he was basically doing back-to-back stages at this Good Food show. And so I was lucky to even grab an hour of his time. Very, very grateful to him. I think Chris is one of these dream guests, isn't he? I mean, you could just tell he's got all of these super strong convictions about food. And that's because he's a doer. He's been there on the front line. He was genuinely selling fruit and veg. And when he does his TV presenting, he's not just reading from a script. He really knows his stuff, and when he's going into people's houses for Eat Well for Less, he's genuinely giving his real advice, and his cookbook are his actual recipes that work for him, despite the fact he's not had professional chef's training. I've learned so much from my chat with Chris, and I hope to get him back on the podcast in a future episode because there's so much more I'd like to learn from him. If you enjoyed this podcast, if you're new to the podcast, then please do stick around. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to it. You can get in touch with me on my Instagram, which is Ollie Horn Pics, OLLIEHORN Pics, or you can email us at podcast@pona.app. That's podcast@pona, PONA.app. I've got another fantastic episode that I recorded on location at the Good Food Show coming up this time next week, so I'll see you then. Prepare a beef stock